You have a vlog? That's really cool.
All right, here we are. IT Coach for Business Leaders, episode number 2. We've got 1 in the books, so we're doing good, I guess.
Yeah.
So we've been talking about how to create an effective cloud strategy. Part 1, we ran through like just the basic definition of cloud. We talked about all the AAS, software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, and talked about some of the benefits. So my question is, after having done this once, do you wish you could now go back and do episode 1 all over again?
Well, I think, I'm happy with the content that we got out there. I think we gave some good information. If we were going to reshoot it, maybe we could get, Harrison Ford to play me.
Hey, there you go.
I might be happier with it, but...
I haven't thought about who I would have as my stand-in, but maybe I need to do that.
Or if he's too old, maybe Justin Hartley. I know he's big right now.
There you go. So, tagging onto that, how confident are you that today's episode is going to deliver some useful information?
Well, I think as we've talked about this, all the information that we are going to discuss today, it's just based on our real world experience. It's what we encounter when we go out to clients. So I find that information is very relevant moving from customer to customer. So I think it should be helpful.
Cool. We're doing a good thing then.
Yeah, hope so.
So today's topic, creating a cloud migration roadmap. Essentially, we're talking about having an actual destination in mind, considering, if you can think about this in terms of an actual map, there's different routes you can take to get to your destination. So what you're probably doing is considering those different routes, the impacts they may have on your overall journey, and you're making some decisions and plotting out that actual course that you're going to take. So in terms of IT, one of those route options, creating a roadmap would be the financial aspect of cloud offerings. And when you think about the financial aspect of the cloud, that's really one of those arguments that has been framed really well by cloud providers to the point where I would say most people out in the business world think that cloud is the less expensive option.
Absolutely.
Above purchasing hardware and software. But that may not always be the case, so that's something we need to talk about. Can you explain kind of that difference between operational expense versus capital expense and what's involved there?
And I think those are a couple of key terms, the operational versus capital. That's what you hear all the time when you speak to cloud providers and how it's marketed. They always tout the advantages of this is an operational expense rather than a capital expense, and it's always portrayed as a positive. Mm-hmm. Is it always a positive? Well, maybe. It depends on your business. I have worked with CFOs, and those CFOs will tell me, the last thing I want is another monthly expense that I've got to, cover my nut on, that I've always got to have that going. Some business leaders I talk to, they want that. They want something they own, they can appreciate, and they can keep for a number of years. So it really depends on the nature of the business and what their plans for the future are.
Because the cloud model, when we're talking operational expense, it's always pitched as it's going to be consistent, predictable, you can plan, you know what your cost is going to be. And that's always, like you said, kind of put into the positive light versus capital expense, which may be a very large upfront investment.
Right. And don't misunderstand me. I mean, I think it absolutely can be, and it can be a very nice thing for an IT expense to be very predictable. This is what I'm going to have to pay. The message I want to deliver, though, is that's not always the case, and you should not make the assumption that that's going to be the best deal for you. So there's a lot of variables that play into that when making that decision.
So if you can't always really determine like which is better, operational versus capital, because I'm assuming there's a lot to think about to make that decision. It may be more important to some companies or less important to other companies, but can you talk about when on-premise solutions like purchasing and owning equipment might be a better choice versus that predictable operational expense?
Sure. So let me give you an example. We'll use email because that's something that's very ubiquitous. Almost everyone has an in-house email system now. I will tell you that for the last few years, it has become increasingly rare for us to do an on-prem email solution because it has become very affordable to do that, through providers like Microsoft Office 365.
Mm-hmm.
They take a lot of the upfront cost out of setting up an Exchange server, the maintenance of it all. But when you start looking at the variables, just your user count. So let's just use very simple examples. The user account alone. So if you come to me and it's like, Aaron, I've got 10 users that I need to set up an email server for. Well, I'm gonna immediately steer you to Office 365 because the return on investment that you're going to have to realize from an on-prem solution is going to take you years and years
Right.
to get that back. And by the time you did, quite frankly, that hardware is probably going to be out of date.
Mm-hmm.
You come to me and say, Aaron, I've got 1,000 users that I need to put into an on-prem solution. Well, now the math's not quite so certain. Maybe that's still the right solution, maybe not. It depends on your business, what how your financials run, how long you like to keep equipment, how important it is to you to stay on the latest, greatest platform at all times.
Right.
Microsoft will tell you that, you got to be on the latest, greatest. Do you? No. I've got customers running Office 2010 still. This is 2017.
Yeah.
And they're happy with it.
It still works just fine.
It still works just fine.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you need in your business, what's important to you.
Yeah. So we've talked about sort of the emergence of cloud. There's an impact there on the IT market overall. So have you seen any reactions or changes in the market from hardware providers based on these cloud offerings that are now so common?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it just goes back to capitalism, the lessons we learned, back in many business classes, it's supply and demand, right? So as cloud has become more prevalent, that's hurt some hardware manufacturers.
Yeah.
And so they have slashed prices, and so there's been a shift so that a lot of hardware solutions have become a lot less expensive. There's a natural trend of that anyway. Computer hardware always gets cheaper and more powerful over time.
Right.
It's been true for many, many years, and this has just exacerbated that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's made the decision a little more cloudy, so to speak.
I think the exception to that rule of technology getting cheaper over time is the smartphone.
Yeah.
Because every time a new iPhone comes out, it's more and more expensive. Yep. But when you're talking like storage space, hard drives, things like that, over time, a technology that was extremely expensive continues to trend downward over time to where it becomes very affordable. And I guess that's what keeps that conversation relevant, the operational versus capital expense conversation. Because of those changes, it's always going to have to be something that companies must discuss and make a decision on.
And that's the key thing, what you just said, is they've got to actually think about it
Mm-hmm.
and talk to outside help and make it a relevant decision. But, my message is don't just accept the marketing department, because Microsoft and those other
What?
teams, I know,
Marketing isn't always just, straightforward and
Yeah.
completely.
except for ours, of course.
That's right. There
Yeah.
you go. So, one thing to consider on that roadmap is the actual process of transition to cloud from on-premise, or whether it's application or hardware infrastructure, whatever that may
Sure.
be. When you make the transition, there's going to be some type of impact on end users, because the software may look and feel different.
Often a big one.
The performance, speeds, things like that come
Right.
into consideration. So how can a business leader control or plan for the organizational change side of things with their end users in mind?
Well, the key words you just said is plan for, and I've been amazed at how many businesses we've walked into after the fact. They'd been an on-prem solution for years, and they decided to move to the cloud, and it seemed like someone came in, slick salesperson, and sold them on a cloud solution, and none of those questions got asked
Yeah.
in advance, because they were surprised to find that, oh, well, yeah, my stuff all runs in the cloud now, but now I have a terminal server interface to get to everything. And my speed may not be quite what it was, because now I'm having to go, out to Washington State in order for my connectivity. So a lot of that. So thing one is just recognize and ask. So that ought to be part of the upfront discussions between management and the potential vendor. Beyond that, I would say it is very important to get end user input into this.
Yeah, I know you've mentioned that before in our discussions about having the end users actually being a part of some of these decisions that are made. Why is that so important?
Yeah, because too often management just sits in the room and they make these unilateral decisions, and they're not the ones that are actually using the product.
Yeah.
It's their employees that are the end users. So I think it's super important to get those employees in there, let them see the interface, let them play with it. Ideally a proof of concept is in order, especially anytime you're moving to cloud. I would suggest, proof of concept. Try it out on a small basis, on some dummy data, or perhaps even some real data, a small portion of it, but let them see what the whole experience is like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know, in the past, when you think about demos, and I'm talking here in context of software, like cloud software applications. When you see a demo, the person who's doing the demo is an expert
Sure.
navigating that software.
Yeah.
They know it inside and out, and so if you don't expose someone who's never used it before from within your organization to see how they react to it, it may seem way easier or way
Right.
different than it's actually going to be, rolled out to your company. So, and I'm sure that applies across to some of the things you mentioned, like, terminal services and things like that.
It absolutely does, and it's change.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's good change, even if the new interface is better than the old, it's change,
Yeah.
and people need to be prepared for that and know what's coming in advance of day one. They don't need to come in on Monday morning and who moved my cheese,
Yeah. Guess what?
and expect to stay, keep productivity at the same level.
Yeah.
There's going to be some learning curve.
Right. Yeah. So I guess having an actual plan for that
Absolutely.
is the answer to, maintaining a certain level of productivity throughout a transition, and that's great advice. So you mentioned something when we were talking just now, like you mentioned physical location, Washington State. So one of the differentiators between various cloud solutions and even versus on-premise is one, physical location of the service being provided, and two, who is actually providing the service. Because there are times when certain products might be white labeled and resold by a reseller, and so the person you're doing business with may not actually be
Right.
the real technology company or the creator of the technology. And then other solutions might require multiple components. You may be talking about a software that has add-ons to extend the functionality for certain things you need to do within your organization. So cloud offerings can still be very complex, even though often they sound very simple.
Absolutely.
There's major differences in who is providing the technology and where the technology is sourced from or located. And when you think about global providers like IBM, Microsoft, Amazon, another point comes into that where you may not even be able to know the physical origin of some of the services that are being provided.
Right.
So considering some of those complexities and some of those arguments, what are some of the things that a business leader needs to think about surrounding the complexity of the cloud?
So wow, you touched on a lot there.
Sorry.
So, starting with the physical location, you're right. You can't always know that, but you certainly should make an effort to try. So let's talk about that local provider versus or the global providers, and there's pros and cons to both, right? I'm not going to steer you away from either. Just again, it depends on your business. That global provider, he has the advantage of being able probably to have diverse geographical locations, which is why you can't always know. Whereas the local provider may not have that, but he may have a lower price point as well. But I need to know that. So if I'm counting on this cloud solution to provide disaster recovery abilities for me, I would want to know that, well, my data is not housed in the building next door to me, for example.
Right.
I would take some comfort in knowing it. But if it's also somewhere else, well, I'd want to know where is that somewhere else, and are there multiples? Because just because it's somewhere else doesn't mean it's safer, right? It's like the old saw about the out-of-town prophet, right? They always get more respect. I think we think of it, well, it's up in the cloud, so it must be safer. Well, maybe, but not necessarily. So you want to know what that data center looks like, what kind of security it has, what are their disaster recovery plans. Is their data center in some place that might have to deal with political implications that could cause a shutdown, weather implications, all sorts of things. So that's the connectivity piece. The integration piece you mentioned as well. Integration is really a tough one in the cloud space right now because, as you know, Josh, there are multiple cloud providers out there clamoring for your money, right? And there's some really great solutions out there, but they don't always play ball together. And so you've had this on-prem solution for years and probably finally got some of those integration pieces worked out to where this piece of software can talk to this one and pass that data back and forth. Now you're moving this database up into the cloud. Well, how do I still get those reports that I'm counting on? So that's certainly something to play into. Speed, again, location, it's physics. So moving data from here to a data center, like I have right here behind me, well, that's going to move pretty quick over a gigabit or 10 gigabit pipeline. Moving that same data out to another state, it's going to take longer. Now, maybe the amount of speed it takes is agreeable. I'm okay with that, based on the interface. But again, that goes back to that end user testing and making sure, well, is this an acceptable solution?
I remember the first time I used some of the Microsoft cloud software offerings, and you would click a button and then you see the little spinning So things are taking place, data's being transferred, but just getting used to that little few seconds of compute time
Right.
was a big deal.
It is.
But at some point you get used to it, and then that becomes the expectation. You adapt to using the
Right.
different type of software, and even if there is a little latency, I don't know what it is. Your work habits just kind of adapt so that it's no longer.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't even notice those things anymore. And of course, that was years ago, and so I'm sure now offerings are probably much faster than they were at 5, 6, 7 years ago when cloud software really began breaking into the market.
And again, it's going to depend on where you live in the country.
Yeah.
We're here in Little Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we've got some of the fastest internet in the nation here. You go 20 miles up the road, and that's not so.
Right.
And so I can have a business that may have, and in fact, I do have businesses that have multiple locations. And here in the Chattanooga footprint, wow, things are lightning fast. They go 20 miles up the road, and it's not.
Yeah.
And so they've got a plan for how to deal with that connectivity issue.
I'm sort of curious about, in your role as VCIO, because I know you work with so many different local companies and help them through a lot of these scenarios and make these types of decisions. What's the process you usually do? Do you put together reports that you show the two, comparing the alternatives? How would you work with a company's leadership team to evaluate and make those types of decisions?
Sure. Well, I think it starts with having these kind of discussions. It's sitting down with, ideally, not just management, but certainly management.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because I think I found too often management has just tried to push this off to their IT people.
Mm-hmm.
And ask them to make these decisions, and the IT people don't feel comfortable doing that because they don't know the whole big picture for what management wants.
Yeah.
At the same time, the IT people need to be in the room. They need to be involved in these discussions as well, and so we start by sitting down, having those discussions, and let's look at, well, what's the status quo now? What are you doing now? What do you like about what you're doing now? What do you
Mm-hmm.
not like about what you're doing now? It really starts with a goal conversation. What are you trying to get out of this?
Yeah.
If the answer is, well, I'm just trying to get out of this because I saw a commercial, I should be moving my business to the cloud. That's not a good reason.
Yeah.
How's it going to benefit your business? So we start with those kind of discussions. And then it's just a matter of, we take the experience, as you said, we work with literally hundreds of companies in the area, and we take our experience there and seeing similar goals and find the solutions that work for them,
Mm-hmm.
bring that in and start doing those contrasts and comparisons for a cloud or a on-prem or I think our business buzzword last time was hybrid, right?
Yeah, there you go, hybrid cloud.
It's hybrid, and I think for the foreseeable future, hybrid's going to be the answer. It just depends on what applications your business needs as to which go in the cloud and which are on-prem. I think I know what's coming.
You brought up business buzzwords, so this is obviously where we have to head now, because we've got, this is going to be a recurring thing, maybe not every episode, but I think it's fun to have a 30-second buzzword buster.
I went over last time, didn't I?
I think last time you were right around 39 seconds maybe,
Okay.
but I thought you did a pretty good job. So the goal is to explain this buzzword with as little industry jargon as possible in 30 seconds. Are you ready?
All right.
Okay, this week's word is redundancy.
Redundancy.
Go.
So redundancy, for me, it's structuring your solutions because we live in a world where things fail, right? Because they were engineered by human beings. Human beings are fallible, and so you've got to engineer solutions. The fact, expectation that things are going to fail.
Mm-hmm.
No one has unlimited funds, so you engineer solutions on things that are most likely to fail. In a server, that would be hard drives and power supplies. In a cloud solution, well, it might be that whole company fails. I want to have a backup for it. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. That still felt long.
I thought you were going really long there,
Yeah.
but it was 39 seconds again.
Yeah,
So you've
that's
got
my
this
magic
thing,
number.
39.
I think next week, next time we talk about in 40 seconds or less.
In 40, yeah, okay, so that way you can win
so I
every
can meet my goals.
But again, I thought that was a really good, I mean, it seems to me like you're really good at taking some of these IT concepts and putting them into just real world terminology. So I would imagine that's probably very valuable for some of the businesses you work with as well, who don't necessarily have high levels of IT expertise or
Sure.
understanding.
Well, I mean, all of us in our various businesses, we all speak different languages, right? And I work with quite a few medical providers. We were talking about this yesterday, one of our customers, and that's a whole other world to me. They get into, I'm sitting in meetings with them, and they start talking about modalities and all these machines and testing and everything, and it flies completely over my head.
Hold on a second.
So, yeah, it's like, don't
Yeah.
know what that means, but
I've heard some people here talk about having acronyms for our acronyms.
absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes embedded within an acronym is another acronym.
Yeah. Okay, so there's quite a few topics related to creating a cloud roadmap that we haven't covered, and we're not going to be able to cover everything, obviously,
Sure.
in one podcast episode, but I do want to just kind of kick a couple of topics your way and maybe just get some quick thoughts from you on what a company would be considering there. So the first one is connectivity and downtime.
So connectivity. So we start talking about moving solutions up in the cloud. Connectivity becomes vital, right? Because those solutions no longer in your workplace, they're somewhere else. So your internet connection becomes vital.
Mm-hmm.
From two standpoints, and you touched on both of them. One, from a speed perspective, you want to make sure you've got adequate connectivity bandwidth to carry that workload, because as you might imagine, it's more expensive to have a pipe that runs somewhere else in the country than it is internal to your building. So you've got to make sure you have speed there. And then we'll go back to our buzzword of redundancy.
Mm-hmm.
Now that connectivity piece, now that your workloads are somewhere else, redundancy becomes all the more important.
Mm-hmm.
So the more workloads that you put up into the cloud, the more that you're going to have me kicking and screaming and saying, you've got to have redundancy for your past. So that probably means redundant firewalls, which you may or may not have had before, because one of those firewalls goes down, you're dead in the water. It probably means redundant internet connections, ideally either from different companies or from a company that can tell you and demonstrate to you that they have a truly redundant path through their whole network where their providers, they're getting their internet from a couple different providers.
Yeah.
And we'll say that goes to the last mile too. And we may have talked about this before, but I think it bears repeating is don't assume that just because you have two different providers, you have true redundancy. If those two providers are both coming in on the same telephone pole and car crashes into that pole, it may take both of your solutions down. So you need to make sure even the path into your building is vital.
Yeah. So another topic, we've discussed this, so I'm going to leave it to you to just kind of explain what you're talking about here. You mentioned cloud sprawl.
Okay.
What would a business need to take into consideration for cloud sprawl? What's that?
So what we've run into, because cloud offerings have become so prevalent out there, and because they make it really easy to sign up, literally can be go to a web page, whip out a credit card and put it in there.
Buy now.
Yeah. We have found we've worked with businesses where, literally anyone in the company was just making a decision to go out and buy a cloud solution.
Mm-hmm.
And they may or may not check with IT before they did that.
Yeah.
And so we'd walk into a business that, finally they got fed up and they're like, why is everything such a mess? And we come in and start finding out that, well, they may even have multiple instances of the same cloud solution purchased by different people, and they're paying, higher rate than they should be because they haven't bundled those together. They have failed to get the integration piece together, consider the security aspects of that, because when I connect to the cloud, there's potential exposure for my data now. And so what I mean by cloud sprawl is just failure of management and IT to work together to make sure that we know where all of our dollars are being spent and where all of our data is being housed.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about that from marketing perspective, so let's say I'm a small company and I want to sign up for an email service to send out mass, keep a database of contacts and send out mass email messages. So you're thinking of something like a MailChimp or a Constant Contact.
Right.
And I can easily, as a marketing person, go out and just sign up for it and begin using it without ever discussing that decision with anyone else in the company, especially clearing it with IT. So you're saying even decisions like that should probably be discussed with a larger group.
And Josh, that's an excellent example because I have seen that exact scenario happen at many different customers. And here's the downside to it. Yeah, you as the marketing guy, you can sign up for that. But now those emails are going out on your domain, right? And so there's the very real potential for you to end up getting your domain flagged as getting put on a spam blacklist because you may exceed some threshold that someone else has set on their spam defense. Those spam defenses talk with each other. Before you know it, you end up on a blacklist, and now your regular email isn't functioning correctly because you were sending out these mail blasts. So it could be a spam defense that kicks in. It could be the ISP. I've seen ISPs block your port 25 because they saw so much traffic getting bounced back from the domain. Because let's be honest, people don't always use up-to-date mailing lists when they send out those blasts, and so
there may be some old spreadsheet and they just import a list of contacts in and don't really do the diligence of filter them, because it's a manual process of looking at each one and saying, is this still a relevant contact?
Yeah. And so that sets you up for potential bounces, and those come back to your mail server if you had one that you're hosting in-house. So there's all sorts of potential problems that could be probably alleviated if communication happened with IT first, and just make sure we have a plan. Because we're all for you using that service because we'd rather not you send it through our mail anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But let's do it in a planned method.
Sure. So the last topic I just wanted to throw out there, and I know this is something that probably easily gets overlooked, and that's exit strategy.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
So, and again, this is something we've seen time and time again. Usually on the aspect, fortunately for us, it's that other company exiting their existing provider to come to us. That's my favorite kind of exit strategy. Ideally, they would have prepared in advance and known when they signed up with the provider they have what it was going to look like to get out from there. So now my data all resides in a cloud provider somewhere. Well, there's a host of issues with that, starting with just the practicality. How do I get it back? Let's say I've got a few terabytes of data that are housed in a data center out in, we'll use Washington State again as an example. That's my working data. So on a given day, I'm not accessing all that data, right? But now I'm exiting, I need it all back. Now, how am I going to get it all back? Well, am I going to download it all over the internet? Probably not. That could take weeks or months to do. So are they going to let me just come in there, and are they going to allow me to ship them a hard drive and they'll ship it to me? Maybe, maybe not. They'll, so I need to know those. How do I get my data back? Licensing comes into it. We worked with companies that the way that their software was licensed, the cloud provider owned all the licensing that they ran on. And when they tried to get their data back, they realized all of a sudden that they don't own the license to any of that software they're trying to run on. So now they may need to get it. And that may even include the Windows operating system.
Wow. Yeah.
So they may have a virtual machine that is running on a cloud provider somewhere. And so the cloud provider is more than willing to give them that virtual machine. Here you go, but you have to properly license it. Well, if that virtual machine happens to be let's say it's an enterprise grade license, they may not need, because that cloud provider was using it to host many customers. That customer may be having to spend a whole lot more money on licensing than they had planned on, just because that was the strategy of their existing provider. Legalities play into it. What does my exit strategy look like? What kind of rights do I have to my own data? What have I signed away when I, but did not read through that fine print before signing on the bottom line? So there's lots of things I guess it's almost like a prenup agreement with your data provider. What does this look like if we break up?
Yeah. Just having this conversation and the previous conversations we have, it's just so apparent that there are so many possibilities, options, decisions, things that you need to really think through. It's kind of daunting when you think about the technology decisions that even small companies need to make. So I don't really envy being in that position, but I know there are people out there who that's what they were made for.
Sure.
Evaluating, making those technology decisions, heading in that direction. So, I think it's great that there are people out there like that, and services like what InfoSystems provide, your position as VCIO, where you can really provide the advice and guidance that people may need to make those decisions. I wouldn't want to, if I had a lawsuit on my hands and had to defend myself, I wouldn't want to have to build the case on my own. I would want some advice, and somebody to help steer me through that. So, I can imagine that when you're running a company and have to make these decisions, how important is it that they have a good advisor on hand to help steer them?
Well, that's our goal, and what we often say when we talk to business leaders is we want them to be able to focus on what they went to school for, what their education gives them, whether it be a doctor, whether it is a lawyer, whatever. Let them focus on what they're good at. Let us do the part that we're trained to do.
Yep. Great advice. Well, I think we're done with episode number 2. So any final thoughts?
I believe that covered it.
All right. I think that's hopefully some good info for the people listening in today. So with that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll be coming back with a new episode. I guess maybe I should drop a teaser for what the next series is going to be about, because this was a 2-part series, covering the cloud. And so I think if I've learned anything from watching years and years of television, it's that you always have to have that teaser at the end of the episode.
Is it going to be a cliffhanger?
Yeah, you got to have the cliffhanger. So next, and I love this topic, this was something that you really immediately came up for when we were talking about the possibilities for this podcast, and that is the top 3 challenges, the top 3 IT challenges for small business. And so our next 3 episodes are going to cover what you consider the top 3 challenges and how to address those for small companies.